My name is Brian Hatch, and I host and created a podcast called All in the Addicted Gamblers podcast. I did this as a result of a 14-year gambling addiction. I started out gambling in college. I was a freshman in college. And after going to play blackjack with some friends, I won that night, and quickly I returned alone. And it was a 5-hour round trip to go gamble. In Michigan, you could gamble at Tribal Casino at 18. And so I took this 5-hour round trip on a weekly basis, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week throughout my freshman year of college. 3 months in, I called the helpline because I realized I have a problem. But I also sort of called the helpline under the guise of, I'm writing a paper. Could you send me some information? Because I was still the shame. I didn't want to say like, oh, I have a problem. Please help me. I wanted to say, I'm curious about this. And so they sent me the information, and in it were these 20 questions, and it's the same 20 questions you get asked if you go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. And in it, it says if you answer yes to 7 or more, you have a gambling problem. And I answered yes to, I don't know, 15 or 16 at the time. Looking back, it's one of those things where you look back and you kind of go, I probably could have answered yes to all 20 if I really thought about it. But 15 or 16, so I knew I had a problem early. I mean, I was only 18. I knew I had a problem, but I was also only 18. And I thought, well, I can't have an addiction already. I'm just 18. I'm just a few months out of high school. And so I continued to gamble. And then I turned 19. And again, in our region where we're from, you could go to Canada at 19. And so I was driving to Casino Windsor in Canada to gamble when I was 19. I was a blackjack player. I started with blackjack because of the friends, and then quickly I ran into people who argued at blackjack, and that's not why I was there. I was there to feel comfortable and to feel good, and that didn't make me feel good, so I switched over to roulette because it was more of an individual game. But then roulette wasn't fast enough. It was so slow. And so to get that fix, I needed to gamble faster, more, and so I started playing slot machines, and that's where my addiction really took off, and a lot of harm was created. I had to move home with my parents after I was academically dismissed from college because I never went to class. I was always gambling. And then I actually got an apartment with a friend after about 8 months of living at home. And I continued to gamble. And so rent, bills, it was always very tight. I ended up getting a second job to work at that time so I could fund my gambling, I guess. I mean, I was using the money for bills to gamble, and then I would borrow money to pay these bills off. I would lie constantly. I would lie about why I needed money. I would lie and say, oh, I paid too many bills this month. And so I need a little extra money for groceries. Can I have $80 or something? And I would hit up my sisters, my parents, some friends, really anybody who was willing to give me money. And that continued for a few years. And then when I was 24, I wanted to go back to school. 23, 24, I wanted to go back to school, just to community college. And so I went to my grandfather and I said, hey, would you co-sign a loan for me so I could go back to school? And he very willing said yes. And he wanted to see his grandson succeed. So he co-signed this loan. And when the check arrived, he sort of rethought it. And he said, you know, this interest rate is kind of high. What if I just give you the money, you send the check back, I'll give you the $4,000, you can go to school and just pay me back without interest. And I was like, that's a great idea. And you know exactly what I did, which was I kept the check, I kept his money, and I gambled it all away in 2 nights at the casino in Detroit at the time. And that night, leaving the casino, I had a panic attack, and I was in the car, and I had called my mom because I didn't know what was going on. And my mom said, well, go to the hospital. And, you know, if you go to your primary care doctor, they ask you, do you drink and how often? Do you use drugs and how often? Do you smoke and how often? But they don't ask you if you gamble. And I think if we could get more people to screen for gambling addiction, you could head off some of that harm that happens. Losing $10,000 was a huge hole for me. There was no way that I was going to be able to pay that off quickly. I went to the casino with my roommate, my friend Chris, and he gambles in the way that most people gamble, which is he'll gamble $40 and call it a day. But he was a drinker, and he drank that night, and he got pretty tipsy, and I was able to convince him to give me his ATM card and his code, and I took money out of his account to gamble. And after I did that and we were leaving the casino, he looked at me and he said, "You have a problem and you need to get help." And nobody had ever said that to me before. Nobody really knew to say that to me. So when he said it, you know, one of my best friends, it really hit home with me. And so the next thing I know, I'm at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in a church basement. There were 3 other people, all of them about 25 years older than me at the time. And so it was just sort of awkward. I was uncomfortable. I didn't feel that welcomed. And so I didn't go back. The following week I drove and I sat in the parking lot and I didn't go in. And the following week I said, I don't have gas money, and I didn't go. And then I just decided I could recover on my own. So a year and a half later, I went to my second meeting, and that was the one that took. And it really took for 2.5 years. I didn't gamble. Things were going well. And then I got complacent in my recovery, and I thought, I'm tired tonight. I'm not going to go to my meeting. And then I did that again, and I did it again. And eventually I just decided, well, I don't need Gamblers Anonymous. I'm fine. I can do this on my own. And again, that lasted about 6 months before I was back gambling again. And I stayed away from GA because there was shame about returning and changing my date, which is silliness. You shouldn't worry about that at all. Gamblers Anonymous expects that you're going to have a recurrence and need to come back to the room, and you just go back to the room and you change your date. It's not a big deal. You don't even have to live by the date. Some people the date can get very, the date can become sort of an all or nothing type of thing, where if you don't keep your original date, you feel too much shame. And that's ridiculous. You don't need to feel that shame. You can change your date. As long as you don't place a bet today, that's what matters. And so I went back to GA, but I went back with working 3 jobs because I thought this time around when I stopped gambling, I'm going to work 3 jobs. I was working 96 hours a week. It was a terrible thing to do. And I thought if I just use up all my time working, then I'll bring in income to pay back my debt. And also I won't have any time to gamble. And that worked for a few months. And I had this little window on Sunday nights where there was time to relax. And so I went with some coworkers to the bar, and I let loose, and I let too loose, and I got behind the wheel, and I ended up flipping my car over. I was thrown out of the vehicle on the highway, and I woke up in a ditch. It was a cold February night. I had to go to the hospital that night, so I didn't go to jail, but I did get in trouble with the law. Eventually it caught up with me, and I had to see a counselor because of my gambling. Or excuse me, because of the car accident. And the counselor, even after this car accident caused by alcohol, said to me, "You don't have a drinking problem, you have a gambling problem." And I thought that was telling. If after this car accident, I'm being told I don't have a drinking problem, but I have a gambling problem, then gambling must be pretty heavy in my life. Anytime my bank account had money in it and I would gamble to take it negative. You know, I would over withdraw the account, and my bank at the time let me over withdraw my account. And so then there wasn't money to pay back the payday loan, and then it was further in the negative, and it was just a nasty cycle. And then I took out shady internet loans to gamble. But everything was good. It was 2 years of not gambling. I had paid back debt, and then my dad died suddenly. And I went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting that night because I knew better. I knew that it would make me want to gamble. I knew that gambling would make me feel better about him dying, which is sort of silly to say, but it would make me feel good. And so I went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, and that was helpful. And I think I made it about another 2 months before just the grief was too much, and I ended up gambling. And again, exponentially worse. Took out worse loans with terrible interest rates, really high. Should be illegal, and I think now it is illegal in the state of Michigan where I did it. But that relapse that I had, that recurrence I had, lasted about a year. And in that time frame, my mom had said, it's sad here. Why don't you had always wanted to move to California. Why don't you move and start fresh? And I was like, that's a great idea. So I worked a bunch of overtime, saved up my money, cashed out my 401k, which wasn't a lot, but it was still my 401k. And then my mom had lent me a little bit of money as well. And I took all that, I loaded up my car and drove to California from Michigan, which was a wonderful experience up until Arizona, where I hit a tribal casino and I drove by it and I said, no, no, no. Then I got to my hotel and I was antsy and I was like, what do I do? And I went, and it was a terrible casino. I didn't have a good time, but I just was there because I was addicted and I was compelled to gamble. And so I gambled there. The next night I was in Vegas gambling on my way to California. And then once I moved to California, I started taking the 4.5 hour drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And I did that every so often, whenever time permitted and whenever money permitted. And I slowly chipped away at all the money I had gone out to California with. Then I started taking loans again and just got in the nasty cycle again. And eventually on July 23rd of 2014, I placed my last bet, which was at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. And it was because I drained all of the money that I had. Everything I moved out there with was gone. The 401k money, the money my mom loaned me, the money I had earned while working out there, all gone. And I didn't know what to do. So I ended up having to file bankruptcy because I had accumulated enough debt to where my hourly jobs were never going to pay this off. That's the bad part about gambling, is it not only affects you mentally, but it affects your wallet, and our livelihood is money. And if you don't have any, you're not exactly looking for a livelihood anymore. You're not looking to be alive if you can't function in life. Gambling has the highest rate of suicidality than any other addiction. 1 in 5, 17 to 20% will attempt suicide, and 50% will have ideations. I have yet to meet somebody. I shouldn't say that. It might be a few people, but most of us who gambled had ideations of suicide because sadly it becomes a solution. Like, well, I don't know what else to do. And you need to know that there is help out there, and that there is financial help, there's mental health help. So that way you don't have to see that as a solution. And gambling's known as the hidden addiction. And for exactly the reasons that you said, is you can't see physical signs of it. You don't know. And that's the sad part for the affected other. Every gambler will affect, there's different statistics, but 7 to 10 people. And so, in a marriage or in a partnership, when one partner finds out that the other one has been gambling and all this money is gone, it's just so shocking and sudden. And you think, how on earth did this happen? And I didn't see it. And it's because it's very easy to hide. It's so easy to hide. And if somebody does have some sort of financial issues, gambling's a good guess. I mean, you can kind of figure it out if you know the signs to look for, in just the ways that people hide it. And it is sadly what is hidden a lot. To me, gambling is chocolate cake. You're supposed to have a piece of chocolate cake once in a while. You're not supposed to eat the whole cake. So that's why Las Vegas exists. So you can go, you can have your piece of cake, and then you fly home, and there's not a casino down the street. But then there became casinos down the street everywhere. And now there's casinos everywhere because it's on your phone. And so there's no friction anymore. And that's just scary that you can lose your life savings in a couple of hours on your phone playing blackjack. It ends when you have no money. And that's the sad part. If you're addicted, you're not going to stop until you're out of money, until you can stop funding your addiction. If you have an addiction, you're not going to spend $100 and then go, okay, well, that was my limit, I'm going to get up now. No, you're addicted. So you're going to keep playing until you're out of money, because you are convinced that you will win. And you are convinced that if you win, all your problems are solved. This is what I realized. I didn't realize it. Other people have said it. And it's that I can never win because I can't leave. Even if I do win a jackpot or money of some amount, I'm going to give it right back, because it's all just to fund the gambling. It's not like I'm gambling so I could buy the TV or I can buy a car. I'm gambling to gamble for the rush. If it was me today with the problem, I would not be able to stop online. Online is so addictive. There's friction. We call it friction. And so if you're in a casino and you run out of money and you have to walk to the ATM to go get more money out, That's friction. That's time away from gambling. You have to go to the cage to get your money. That's friction. That's time away from gambling. So now casinos want to use cashless gaming, and that leaves no friction. That leaves no time to get up away from the machine, which makes that even worse on your phone. You know, I had to have time to drive to the casino. I had to have gas money to drive to the casino. You don't need any of that with it being on your phone. It's just there, and it's there all day. And sports betting's a little slower. However, now there's in-play sports betting where you can bet on everything all game long and the odds change. And so it is pretty much just a slot machine again. But I do worry about the online casino more than I worry about sports betting. The solution for me is reduced accessibility. Like a bar, a casino should close. An online gambling operator should close, because that's the only way you get those people who are addicted off without them losing everything they have. So I think if you just find anybody to talk to about it, it helps in some regard. Now, if you can find a gambling counselor, somebody who's trained to deal with gambling, that's where it is. That's what you want, because they understand what you're going through. They've heard all the stories before. They know exactly how to help you. It's just a matter of if you're willing to accept the help and make an effort on your own part. And you talk about it enough and you realize, like, oh, everyone's got their stuff. This is just my stuff. And you talk about it and you bring it out into the open, and then other people realize it's not that big a deal. There's treatment for it. There is help, and you can right the ship. And eventually the urges subside. You get enough time behind you and the urges subside. I get very few urges, and if I do, it's almost laughable, to where I'm like, well, I'm not going to gamble. That's ridiculous. And so I'm happy that I'm at that point, because before an urge would come and it was like, all right, where do I get money to go gamble with? And now I don't feel that way. These days I attend support group meetings. They're not specific to GA, but I found a support group that deals with gambling that's online. We all Zoom in and we all talk, and we're all friends, and it's a great space. And I would encourage anybody to find a group like that. There's plenty of meetings out there that you can log on at home now with Zoom and do it. A lot of people, though, like the in-person meetings, so hopefully there's one in your area that you can find. If you're watching this and you want to join that group, you can email me at leestreetpod@gmail.com, and I'll happily send you over to Jeff and get you the information. It's a wonderful support group. It's meeting 7 days a week. They're scattered throughout the day. We get people from all over the world. So there's people in the UK, people in Australia, Sweden, Norway. We get people from all over who join it. And we do get that younger generation who doesn't want to go and sit in a church basement. They want to pop online, have their hour, and then move on. And then I thought, I need to talk about this, but I can't afford therapy. And so I called up Chris, the friend from the story earlier, who told me that I had a problem to begin with. And I said, hey, would you talk to me once a week about gambling, my gambling addiction? And then we'll put it up as a podcast. And he said, yes. And so that's how the podcast started, All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast. And that was little over 8 years ago, started doing it in 2015. Been doing it ever since. And now we're up to about 340 episodes, lots of lived experience stories, lots of people who work at the different councils, clinicians come on and talk about treatment, advocates. It's my recovery tool, but it's been a good ride of other people get something out of it. Other people feel like they're not alone when they can listen in their, earbuds in the ear, and nobody knows what you're listening to, and you can sort of recover with people in that way. And so that's what I've learned that the podcast can do for people. But for me, it's my recovery tool. If I can keep talking about gambling, then I know I won't go gamble. And it's been a wonderful experience so far. And that has morphed into, we've done some YouTube stuff called The Bet Free Life as well, that I do with Christina Cook from a podcast called The Broke Girl Society, which is a podcast aimed at women in recovery. I mean, it's for everybody, but it is aimed at women in recovery. And that's been the story so far of what I've been able to do with my gambling addiction. Turn the negative into a positive, I suppose.
Yeah, that's good. Because I have heard that said too, like the only way, to bring something out of the darkness is to pull it into the light. And when you pull it into the light, now it's not hidden in the dark anymore. So I do love that beauty of, like you say, talking about it and just knowing that we all have things that we struggle with, but using our stories as a powerful tool to help other people.
You can learn more about gaming and gambling through resources such as Change the Game Ohio. Here you'll discover tips on how you can find a healthy balance as you play. The Zeph Center Prevention YouTube channel also has video resources available to address mental health as well as gaming and gambling.